Welcome to the Startup of the Year podcast, where each episode we showcase exciting new companies from around the world. This podcast is produced by Established, creators of the Startup of the Year program. Established is focused on helping organizations with their innovation, startup, and communication strategies. Thank you to our podcast sponsor, Silicon Valley Bank.
Hello, everybody. It's Frank Gruber again. We're back with the Startup of the Year podcast. Today, we're talking about the state of startup land as we do a deeper dive into the SVB Startup Outlook Report. So super excited to have a special guest today, and we'll introduce him in a second. But before we do that, let's talk about who our co-hosts are today. We've got two co-hosts today. We've got Lori Thiel and Rich Maloy from the Startup of the Year team. And we've lost a couple today. Joe Corbett, who's been on the last couple of casts, is tied up. He's got a couple little ones, and it's spring break. Woo! So he's tied up with that. And we've got Jen Consalvo, who's one of our co-hosts as well. She's tied up at a client. We work with the Established team works with NASA and the NASA iTech program, and she's actually at the Space Symposium, which sounds pretty amazing. She's probably at this point talking about the black hole photo that came out this week, or maybe string theory as they look to, head to the moon in 5 years, which is pretty exciting. So we'll probably have her back on the cast soon, but right now she's with space people.
She's in space. And
did you know that a 28-year-old female engineer is responsible for that black hole photo?
Yes, from MIT. That's what.
Isn't that amazing?
It's pretty amazing. Yeah, they've been trying to find and spot a black hole for 200 years or something, and she figured it out with an algorithm. So that's pretty amazing. And we should probably introduce our special guest, who's joining us from Silicon Valley Bank, SVB. They're actually one of the supporters of our podcast, and we're excited to have a special guest from SVB today. We're going to have a couple, actually several over the next few casts as we work with them on a number of different initiatives. But today we're going to be talking about the SVB Startup Outlook Report and showcasing some startups. So before we get started, let's introduce our special guest today. We've got Theron McCollough. He's joining us from San Francisco. He's been a startup founder himself. He's worked in the industry for a long time, and now he's working with startups with SVB. Everyone, warm welcome for Theron.
Yeah, thanks,
welcome.
Hey there.
Hello.
Welcome to
the cast. Yeah, pretty fun, huh?
Pump me up. Yeah.
Boy, I don't get that music.
Yeah, what's up?
I worked really hard on that. We'll have to find some jams for y'all. So when we do the intros, it's more fun. But yeah, thanks for joining us today. How you doing? How's everybody doing today?
Good. It's Friday.
Good.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Yep.
Happy Friday.
You may not be listening on a Friday, but let's just pretend it's Friday. It's Friday. Yeah,
listener.
Maybe just could be Friday in your head. Maybe that's a better way.
It's always Friday in my head.
Right. When you work in a startup-y kind of environment, and you're always on a mobile device, like it's Friday every day, right?
Why
You're always
not?
connected. Why not? All right. So let's get started. Today we're going to discuss 5 startups. Actually, we reduced it to 4. I was lying earlier. It's 4. And we're now going to talk about before we do that, we're going to talk about the SVB Startup Outlook Report that came out pretty recently, and it's in its 10th year. So Theron, what's happening out in startup land right now? We want to kind of jump in and what did you guys find in that report?
Many things. Thanks, Ray. Yeah, we saw a lot of surprising and interesting things kind of out of left field, and some of them not so surprising, but even more painful. For example, that we all have hiring problems when it comes to engineers, and just trying to fill those buckets is becoming more and more of an issue. The report was great, and we interviewed almost 1,500 different founders. All of them had less than 25 employees. Most of them were private companies and not public companies. So we tried to get a really good litmus for what's kind of happening in the industry. And as you mentioned, been doing this for 10 years now, so we've seen a lot of change. And some of the things that were not even on the horizon, have become paramount and most important to us in our economy right now.
Yeah, 10 years is a long time, and you're obviously seeing those trends. So maybe what are kind of those general takeaways that you saw from this report?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is there's still not enough females. There's still not enough women in these roles, these executive roles, as far as either a co-founder or CEO. We still found that was about 28% of the companies that we reviewed. The interesting part, and what I think I love to focus on, is it's actually grown 10% since the last year. So if we can keep up a 10% growth, if we can't, help push it to 20%, eventually, we'll get to more of a balanced team and balanced orgs. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to into 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, you'd think year over year, if you continue that trend, you should be able to get to that 50%-ish number, right?
I'd hope so. Just like most of these numbers, and especially this has been highlighted and is an issue that I think we're actively just finding phenomenal founders, and they happen to be female CEOs and all that, and being able to be helpful. It should just continue that trend, and it should be 50% right now. So how do we? Right. The faster we get there,
Yep, totally. That's great. And you also found, what else did you find?
Sure. Yeah, I have lots of little stats here that are pretty interesting. One of the things I found most interesting, and this is always part of the case when we do this, there's a certain amount of companies that aren't sure where they're going to raise money from. And I find there was a big jump, about a 5% jump since last year, up to 15% of the companies don't really know where they're going to raise their money or do as far as a company, whether it's IPO or acquisition. And I find that really interesting in that there's more options now than there were in the past. So you have opportunities like venture debt at earlier stages, and companies like Lighter Capital that are offering, they're basically they built their company off of algorithms to say, hey, this is a SaaS company that has these kind of metrics. We should lend against that. So I think companies have more options than they had in the past, and they have an ability to say, hey, do we want to IPO? Do we want to get acquired? Do we want to just build a big company? I think that was one of the most interesting things. The parts that aren't as interesting, that are kind of expected, is your strategy is through acquisition for the most part, and you're still going against that goal of trying to just get acquired, and that's that, as well as the hiring is just a massive issue, as I mentioned earlier.
Talent, yeah, there's not enough talent. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, my speculation is we're seeing more distributed teams as well. So there are ecosystems of talent, and that is really difficult. And so my feeling is, and my thought is, we're going to start reaching out further kind of into that ether and finding more talent from different parts of the world, which is also, pretty awesome, pretty interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Totally makes sense. And then you mentioned maybe that people are focused more on, or the IPO is focused people in an interesting position, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, what's happening, or what we've seen, is there is the same amount, if not more, I guess definitely more capital being deployed into the ecosystem, but less bets are being made. So there's been a little bit of a change and I think we saw a really big upswing in 2018 of making a lot of small bets, where I wouldn't say by any means investors are tightening their wallets at all, but they're deploying capital into companies that have maybe found product market fit, or found some semblance of month over month growth, revenue growth, things like this, and making bets against those early companies that are producing revenue, or finding things besides vanity metrics. So if it's a negative churn combined with new users or something like that, to be a little bit smarter, I think these investors are looking at that versus just throwing a lot of small checks around, which I don't know if that's going to continue or not. We have actually a surprisingly strong 2019 in the end of Q1 now as well. So
yeah, so let's talk about that investment. So founders are out there looking, for investors, and it was a hotter year for that, but still fundraising is hard. So maybe Do you have any idea why or thoughts on why?
We have to face it, as founders, fundraising is always hard, right? That's one of those things that you have to go down that road. For me, what I'm seeing, or what I'd like to see, I guess, is from the point that you start your company is trying to design metrics on what milestones and how you benchmark yourself to get to that Series A. So instead of making it more of an arbitrary, we need to raise a Series A, but say to your team and yourself as a CEO, we need to hit this many customers to justify that round, which, is kind of a way to look at it to take to those same investors, build those relationships with those same investors and try to get them to double down. There's also, all this is speculatory, of course, but because there were so many micro funds that opened last year and some of these emerging managers that started to pool capital together, that follow-on rounds are coming now. And we have like a year and a half later where a lot of these companies are needing more capital to keep running. And so if you have an option of, hey, I'll make 5 or 10 more investments this year, into unknown companies or ones that are pre-seed, and then say, well, maybe I should just do 3 to 5 companies and double down on those that have made some progress already.
Rich, did you want to add something?
Yeah, that doubling down and, that observation, Theron, is I think very important, because with all of, like you mentioned, all the micro funds, the nano funds even that are sub 20 million, there's so much more capital that's being deployed at that level, at that early stage level. And then the other investors have moved up to the Series A. I remember talk about a Series A crunch about 6 or 7 years ago. And now if we get all these startups that are raising seed rounds right now in 18 months, then they're going to be out looking for their next either seed 2 or their Series A round. And so maintaining those relationships with those investors that invested in your seed 1 when you go to look for your seed 2 or your Series A is absolutely critical.
Yeah, we definitely see that, especially if Rich, when you have a lot of times your companies will come back to you first and say, hey, we've done really well together. I'll give you a discount on this next round. And that's, these companies are hitting that maturation about now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So it'll be interesting over the next, probably 2 to 3 years to watch how that develops.
Yeah, totally. Okay. And let's dive into something slightly different here. Investment trends. You're hearing a lot more, maybe bells ringing, physically right now, as well as in the future, with IPOs. So there's 6 IPOs slated for this year. What will that, do to the investment landscape?
Yeah, I think I love the bell. There's a couple things that could happen, and a lot of it depends on what, the signals that are going out right now. We have some of these first IPOs actually happening, which we've seen some drops in. So what kind of signal does that show? What is that going to put for trends? So there's, it's hard to predict, but if it continues to go really well for these IPOs, a lot of people are going to make a lot of money. A lot of people are going to be liquid in 6 or 8 months. And so that's kind of the other side of the coin. If these IPOs go correctly, you're basically going to have a bunch of individuals that are, hey, I understand technology. I love this space. Now I can invest in my friends' companies. Now I can invest in my own company, or even further. Maybe I don't have an appetite for that, but I have enough to put into a fund, and back to those micro funds again,
right?
And how that could really change the landscape. So there's a lot of, heightened discussion on, will this keep on growing at its pace? But this could really fuel that, continued pace, really.
Yeah, no, you're going to see a lot more money going back to founders and folks that have been part of these teams for a while, and they're going to now be the next set of investors, like you said. So that's pretty interesting as well.
It's a beautiful part about the startup ecosystem is that we continue to build and develop and do great things, and as companies are successful and create new investors. and even in places like when Uber acquires a big company in the Northern Africa, Middle East, that is basically the Uber of the Middle East, and it creates all this new wealth in that economy that then can be pulled back into to the next round of startups to come up and help drive things forward. I just love the beautiful virtuous cycle of
circle
all
of life, the circle of startup land life. Cool. Yeah, no, I totally agree, and it's interesting to watch for sure. It does it both at the local level and national level, as you see. Like, there's always a local champion, with a company that rises out of a city that maybe isn't San Francisco, New York, and now they're feeding startups in that local area and helping that economy as well as the national and global economy too. So that's really interesting. Anything else you want to share, Theron?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to share. I guess you'll have a link somewhere to that startup report.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So if you want to listen, read the report yourself, you can actually go to it's off of SVB's. There's a link on svb.com, but the short link for it is soty.link /SVB19. So that's the short link. You can take a look at it and obviously read it thoroughly, as knowledge is power. And we appreciate, Theron, you joining us. And now we're going to jump in and talk about some startups that we've been looking at, all of which have kind of set a theme here for us. Today's theme was really around funding. And I know that seems like a little bit probably broad, but some of our companies are really early stage and haven't raised funding yet. But we've got a bunch of companies that have, and we want to share their stories and kind of updates, as there's a lot of exciting things happening with the startups that come through the Startup of the Year program, as well as our daily newsletter, the Daily Deal Flow, where we're highlighting startups that are raising rounds of capital. And actually, some of the companies that come through that newsletter have actually found investors through that newsletter and wanted to share some of those stories too. So we'll get underway here. We've got 4 companies from different areas around the country. I'm going to kick it off. We just do it alphabetically. So, but before we do that, Theron, thank you very much for sharing your insights on the SVB Startup Outlook Report. Really appreciate it. There's your theme music again. That'll follow you around.
I know. I gotta figure this one out. Have that play all the time for me.
Yeah, exactly. While you're walking around. All right, Theron, thanks so much. Let's jump in. We're going to talk today about a company out of Tampa Bay, Florida. It's called Knack, and it's basically, we've seen them before. They've been a part of our program, and we're at our finals last year. It's a peer learning platform aimed at college students that works with more than 50 colleges across the U.S. and starting to kind of move to consumer via a B2B play. So basically, they're now partnering with institutions, being schools, universities, campuses, and the campuses then are partnering and then rolling out this peer learning product to their students, and it's free to their students. So it includes tutoring, mentoring, coaching with some of their higher performing students. And the company Knack out of Tampa is pretty interesting. They've got a founder, Samir. I've got his phonetical Qureshi, Samir Qureshi. He's a graduate of University of Florida. He's a Florida Gator. So he's down in Tampa now, continuing to build in the Florida area and really moving forward with this company. He give you kind of a timeline. We connected with him last summer. He was just getting this going. He just getting it going to the next level. He had it kind of as a prototype, and it grew and grew and grew. And then he was going out raising his first round of funding. He was part of our Startup of the Year program last year in Boston. He was a top 15 finalist at our event. And I just heard actually through our event, he met one of his angel investors, one of our judges.
He did.
Yep. From Cirrus Ventures, and out of Denver. And so he got an angel check from being at the event as well as being a top 15. And then in November, he announced he raised his seed round, which is a $1.5 million round. So that's big for them as they continue to grow. And then on top of that, extra cash that they were able to pull in, they also then kind of switched their model slightly. But before I move on to that, they had a really interesting set of seed round investors, which included Tampa Bay Lightning owner and Fenway Sports Group partner Jeff Vinnick, who's doing a lot down in Tampa. We work with Embark Collective down there, and he's supporting that effort, as well as a number of others in the waterfront down there as they rebuild that area down there, and it's really interesting. So that's cool. He's got Charles Hudson from Precursor Ventures, Village Capital. Actually, they won the education program in November, so they were if you're familiar with VilCap, they have the peers from their cohort, based on a different theme, vote on who gets the capital, and they won their cohort. So Village Capital invested in them because all of their peers around them that were in the education space said that you should pick Knack as the one that gets funded, and so they got that, and through that they led to them working with GRE, who does the GRE assessments, and basically now the folks behind that are investors in them as well. So ETS is the creator of the GRE test, and they're now working together on an experiment, basically a new assessment together to now kind of close the loop on all the platform. So like if they deploy this platform to a bunch of college students, they need to now close the loop and see how is this improved upon their experience. How are they getting? Are they building on their leadership? Are they building on the delivery of actually the development of the students, or and kind of closing that loop? So that's what they're working on with them. And so they've been kind of going gangbusters here. They're hiring as well. So they've got a link out on AngelList. They've got looking for some senior software engineers, and they're continuing to kind of build. So and one more thing, they're competing again. They compete a lot. They're competing for the Lamina Prize, which is basically a grant for between $25,000 and $50,000. And they'll know by next week if they win that. So again, doing a lot in the space, like the model switch, where they're actually working with institutions now, colleges, college campuses, to kind of have them come on as partners, and then that partner being the college, then rolls it out to all the students. So they've got like Florida A&M University and University of Southern Florida, and Arizona State actually is on board, and they actually Arizona State was in their seed round. So lots going on with Knack.
Boy, you covered that pretty comprehensively.
There's a lot going on. Knack's been busy.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yep. So
I was just going to say, I know we've seen some startups do something similar, but they've obviously started to get a lot of great traction. And as I was just with a friend last night whose son is about ready to go off to college, and she's very nervous and so forth, she had these kinds of resources start to be made available in a way that can hopefully really make sure they stay in school and want to stay in school versus return home, because that's been a trend, I guess, or not a trend, but more and more of my friends have seen their college kids go off, but then not really make it all the way through. And so whether that be lack of resources or not having the right mentoring, et cetera, I just think there's a lot of value to having this available for students, and I hope to see them do well.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And it's basically their goal is to provide this free individual support, or an individualized support to every student on college campuses. So like, if you can imagine, like you go to college and now you have this opportunity to now connect with people that can help you. This is, I think, really powerful. And they're just, now currently just scaling it out and rolling it out to a bunch of different campuses. And I do have comprehensive stats, if you'd like some, on how this is going. They've got 20,000 total users, 4,000 tutors, 10,000 unique courses covered, and they're now on over 60 active campuses. So pretty impressive rollout with their seed round of only 1.5 million. I think it's tied back to a great team already, and their founder Samir is tenacious. He will make this work, and he will push it ahead. So I think that I always talk about the founders being the crucial part, and this founder, he's a go-getter. So I think they're going to do great.
I agree.
Next up, we have Lori. You're going to be talking about RentCheck. RentCheck provides security to renters and landlords to standardize the process and ensuring lasting financial benefit. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means?
I will.
Okay.
So RentCheck is actually a very new startup. And when I say new, I mean just last year.
Oh, and where are they from? Where are they from?
They are from New Orleans.
All right. Love a little New Orleans jazz for you. You like that?
Frank, any reason you're playing jazz?
Oh, jazz. Yes. We're going to be going down to New Orleans. That's right. In just a couple weeks for InnoConf. So if you heard our last episode 6, we talked all about New Orleans and the Gulf Coast and all the different startups that are participating. We're going to be down at InnoConf. It'll be April 29th through May 2nd. So we'll be down there April 30th too with our big Startup of the Year event. So if you're in the area or the region, you should come check it out.
Yes. And I'm going to just say early now that you were just mentioning Inno that actually Rent Check will be joining us at our Startup of the Year competition. So we're going to get a chance to meet them in person as well.
Do you need more jazz? I can play some more.
Nope. I'm good.
Oh, sorry. It's just too easy. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I'm looking for my own music like Theron had. But anyway. So
working on it. Sorry. Go ahead.
It's all right. So Lydia and Marco are the founders. They started this, like I said, this is a very new startup, but they're off to a great start. As you mentioned, this is an app hoping to transform the relationship between renters and landlords by allowing both the renter and the landlord to do a virtual walkthrough and sign off on time-stamped pictures showing the condition of the property at the start and at the end of the lease. And I'm pretty sure we all have been there with the renting an apartment or a house and the stress that is involved when you go to leave a place and are we going to be on the same page with the landlord? So that's what this is pain point they're trying to solve here. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a game changer because they've definitely starting to get some traction. And it turns out, because I always like to hear the background story, that Lydia Winkler and Marco Nelson, the founders, each know a little something about rental disputes. They met in business school at Tulane University, which is also in New Orleans. No jazz music necessary.
Darn it.
At the time, Lydia was a recent law grad, and she was suing her former landlord who refused to return her $1,600 security deposit. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is.
And on the flip side, Marco, who she had met in school, he owns property, and he was familiar with how murky the inspection process can get, especially when working with tenants that are not nearby, hundreds of miles away. So together, they put their minds together and decided that Rent Check should be born. So the app is already being used by renters and landlords in 40 U.S. states and 7 countries. It was initially designed with renters in mind, but what's actually interesting is they've gained a lot of traction more with landlords and have seen them make up roughly 60% of the downloads so far. So, So they just took home $50,000 at the idea pitch competition during the recent New Orleans Entrepreneurship Week. So that's pretty cool.
I wish I had like a, I don't know, money sound or something. I need that. Anyway, Go ahead.
And just to remind what I just said in the beginning is I'm excited because we're going to get a chance to meet them in person and have them be a part of our showcase and pitch competition and get to know even more. So
awesome.
That's
great.
Rent Check.
Excellent. That's really great. I like what they're doing. I think it's definitely needed because we've all run into that situation probably with the not quite knowing if our landlord and I are on the same page. So yeah,
I think I'm going to check it out. I'm a current renter as we speak, and I think it's a great idea. So totally. I think I'm going to give it a try.
Great. All right, great. Next up, we've got Coins, which is spelled Qoins, and it's out of Atlanta, Georgia. Rich, do you want to share a little bit more about what they're up to?
Absolutely. So Coins is a roundup app to let you use your spare change from everyday purchases to automatically pay off your debt faster than ever. And they are hyper-focused on debt. And like most founders, they have a personal story that links them to the founding of their company. And the founder as he came out of college, he still had some student loans, and in his senior year of college, he still had some student loans that he needed to pay off. And rather than figure out a way to make it work, he took out a credit card. And like most college students do, when the credit cards show up in your in the middle of campus and ask you to sign up, and so gets a credit card and
wait. Did he get a T-shirt though for it? Because that's important.
He probably got a T-shirt and a water bottle.
Nice. Okay, that's important. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Very important. Yep, absolutely. Yep, definitely paid for that by making minimum payments for years on that, and realized that it's hard to. It's when you're it can be hard to to set aside the money to make payments, to manage those payments, and to manage that process. And unless you are highly disciplined or you've been taught to do this, most Americans pay off, make just the minimum payments on their debts each year. 65% of Americans only make the minimum payments on their credit card debts. Yeah. And with interest rates on credit cards being anywhere from, if you're lucky, 15, 16%, all the way up to 25% on an APR, that's a ton of money that you're losing and that you're just pouring into the hands of somebody else. And so what Coins does is it links to your bank accounts and links to your credit cards. And for every for every bit that you spend, it takes the change on that. So if it's a $95.66 transaction, then 34 cents of that gets set aside. And at the end of each month, they take that money whatever it's rounded up to, take it from your checking account and automatically make that payment directly for you. And for all of this, they only charge you a $1.99 convenience fee. And so by just paying that $1.99, you will begin to reduce your debt and pay off your credit cards 3 to 5 years faster than you would otherwise. Wow. And one stat that I love from their website is that over $4.5 million has been paid off and counting using the Coins app.
That's impressive. The dollar was it like $1.50? You said
$1.99.
$1.99. Yeah, that's every single time, or is that monthly, or how does that work? Every time you make a payment.
So the payments are monthly and the fee is monthly.
Got it. Okay, great. Very cool.
They're based out of Atlanta, Georgia. They were at Startup of the Year at our finals in October of last year. Also saw them at CES. And, as a consumer-facing app, they get around and make the rounds and get out in front of consumers at every opportunity. And they, and they've raised some money in the past, and they have some good investors from the region. They had Queen City FinTech from Charlotte invested in them a few years ago, and I believe also a Stacked Capital out of New York City had invested in them as well.
All right, that's great. Lori, did you have some additional thoughts on them?
I was just going to say, in addition to having them at our in October, they were one of the top 2 winners at our South by event last year. Right. And that's when we first noticed them. And I got to interview Christian, and you talk about another go-getter founder. He's not going to stop till he gets there. So I always like to give a shout out to the founders, especially when I've had a chance to meet them and do the interview. And he's a good guy. And I think this is a really easy way to pay off your debt, and should definitely be something to hopefully help others.
It reminds me of like Acorns, I think, is the other one that Acorns there's a couple that do similar things, but not necessarily for debt. It's for other, saving for the thing you want to get, or, investing in some way. So like Robinhood was another one that started like that. And now I think they're $1 billion company, right? I think this could have legs.
No, and then, can I just make one little footnote to my rent check, folks? As Theron was kind enough to help us understand the recent report, I forgot to just wanted to do an extra highlight shout out that is a female co-founded startup, as we were talking about the importance of continuing to have female founders. So just wanted to bring that up.
Go ahead, Theron.
Nice. I wanted to mention too that Acorns comment. It's like the Acorns for student loans. My question, I don't know how deep we get into these things, but how many more of these could there be? Right. It could be this for that, but also then how defensible is it? If what stops at Acorns from focusing just on student loans instead in the future.
That's true. No, it's defensibility is important. I mean, I see what you're saying, and definitely they're very focused on one market. Which think about it, like we live in an app economy. People have 1 million apps on their phone, so it could work in that way if they market to the right group. And there's enough people, right? There's always enough people, but it's just when we all are, looking across the board at all the different opportunities to see similar things, that we're saying, okay, there's all these similar like things, but I think they all are taking a slightly different spin. But you're right, like they could. Coins could jump into similar spaces as the others, though, too. It goes both ways. If they build big enough critical mass, and then all of a sudden now they're doing, now you can invest too, or now you can do, all of a sudden they've got checking accounts or whatever, like,
100%.
Yeah. So I guess it's that there's always an opportunity. It's just now continuing, like how do they press into it?
Sure. The neat thing about the student loan subject is there's plenty of customers, right? There's no shortage of people that have student loans that they have to take care of.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how to do it. And instead of, trying to put their stuff into their own little piggy bank or whatever, this is a better way, I think, to do it and not have to and take the thought out of it in some ways. Rich, did you have some?
I was just going to add that the ultimate defensibility comes down to users. And if you have the user base and you're out doing good business, and if you can build a business around where your lifetime value is far greater than your customer acquisition cost, and you get those ratios right, you can run a solid business, and you can choose whether you want to fund or not. And Theron, you mentioned lighter capital earlier, right? And so there's a number of revenue-based investment, alternative capital structures that are popping up, or funds that are popping up along those lines that will fund companies as long as they get their metrics right. And so, if Coins goes out and wins the market and wins the customers, gets the metrics right on customer acquisition, and keeps costs down, then they'll have a lot of options in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, if they're churning out revenue because they're literally taking $1.99 of all these different transactions, I mean, they could be printing money. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a mathematician.
The economies of it make total sense too. When you tell me, look, I could pay off that loan in 3 to 5 years sooner, I just think of, as you mentioned, Rich, at 15%, quarterly or annual. Gosh, that's a lot of money saved.
Yeah, definitely. Really interesting way to slice it, because you're right. There's a lot of competition, but this is a slightly different take. All right, let's move on to our last startup. It's out of Washington, D.C. It's WattBuy, and WattBuy is an online electricity marketplace that helps residents save up to 40% a year on electricity costs by switching them to a cheaper electricity provider. So I don't know if you guys know this, but you actually have the right to choose in certain markets. So Rich, do you want to dive in a little bit deeper?
Absolutely. And so, unfortunately, we don't have this option in Colorado where I live, but currently WattBuy is active in Texas, Pennsylvania, and New York. And really, it's just that when you are in a market where you're able to choose, your electrical provider, how do you know who's the right provider for you? How do you know what's one that matches your habits? How do you find the right one that could save you money, or that will provide use renewable energy sources? And by WattBuy's estimates, consumers are overpaying for electricity in excess of $20 billion in the 17 states where residents have the choice of who provides their electricity. In Texas, there are 109 providers, and each has 10 to 20 different plans. It's crazy. I mean,
it's a lot.
To think about that, you may have a choice you may have 3 providers offering you 5 different plans for where you are. How do you choose between 15 different plans? Nobody has time for that. And it may save you, and you may be able to save money and get renewables. And so WattBuy figures all of that out for you. You plug in your address, and they will let you know, here are the choices and the plans that make the most sense for you.
I love it. I think that's really smart. And I've seen others kind of try this or similar things like this in different markets, and they've been quickly gobbled up. So, meaning acquired, not eaten. So this team.
Where's the Jaws music? I'm just
oh jeez. Right. Yeah. Now I'm created a monster. You got to
stay on it.
Created a monster here. All right. So with WattBuy though, they came out of Techstars Kansas City. So they were part of that accelerator, and then they rolled into our October Startup of the Year competition right afterwards, and they came in top 15, and then they raised their round, which is a $1.8 million round, led by Fort.
They just closed that this year. At the beginning of this year, it was led by Fort Ventures out of Fort Worth, Texas,
which is interesting to me.
Yeah.
So out of Texas, they're getting their round, even though they're based in DC. And then I guess it matters where their focus is, right?
Yeah. And they also had Modern Ventures in there. Modern's out of Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
And I really like the work that Modern does. They have a deals focused program. And so when they're investing in you, they have deep connections. They run summits where they bring in corporate partners that have interests in different sectors and bring in the startups that they invest in from those sectors. Very similar to what we are doing, what we do for our annual summit. But Modern does that and then invests in those companies. And so really like that, Modern, I think, is a great strategic fit for what WattBuy is doing.
Very cool. And yeah, actually, one of the co-founders, Ben Hood, I used to work with out at AOL. So I've known him for a long time. He used to run all the video stuff for AOL, and we used to commute together sometimes because I don't know if you know, but AOL's out in Dulles, and we lived in DC area. So lots of good stuff. Glad to see him jumping in the startup world and with this. It's been something he's been really passionate about for a long time, and I'm glad that they're moving ahead and raising their rounds and growing. So we'll keep an eye on them for sure. Thank you very much, Rich, for diving in there. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this space or WattBuy?
I just wish we had it, but yeah, we're also in a location that we just have one choice.
Change.org. Change.org. Get a change.org going, and everyone can pick their own electricity. Actually, that's interesting. We had NV Energy as the one in Vegas here in Nevada, and they had it on the docket last election to switch, like allow the ability to have choice, and it got voted down, so we don't have a choice now. So yeah, I know, right? So kind of funny. So yeah, we don't have the opportunity to do it here, but I know it could, obviously if we did, I'd love to use this too. So I think that's one of the only barriers, but I think the other markets are big enough for them to be able to tackle those and be okay with that.
Yeah, I want to make a comment too. Like this is super, super interesting, super disruptive, and can make a lot of noise as well. If we don't have options and other states do have options, I think there is we can start to say, wait a minute, I also want those types of options over here. But if no one's really looking at this, and it sounds like a really neat opportunity I love products that kind of democratize our choices and give us more options than we're previously unable to.
Yep, totally agree. And it raises a really interesting point. Lori, did you want to add something?
To that point, I live in California with the one provider, and because there aren't other options, I also think when you become a Goliath, you lose sight of sometimes not being as efficient and being a good customer service company. Ours is in trouble for a lot of the fires that have gone on in the area where I live in California. So to that point, it's just I wish there were other options so that also it keeps that space healthy and competitive, so that everyone stays on their game and does what they should be doing for the public. Just my 2 cents.
No, I think.
Well said.
Well said. Yeah, definitely agree. Yeah. All right. Speaking of power and electricity, knowledge is power, and you can go get the SVB Startup Outlook Report, the 2019 version. It's out there on svb.com, but you can also look at the short link, soty.link/SVB19. So go check that out. We're really excited to have Theron here today talking about the report, and then also jumping in with his thoughts and knowledge about the startup land and some of the startups we looked at. So thank you so much for joining us today, Theron. I really appreciate it.
Can we still have your music when you're not here? And we'll just do a shout out to you.
His exit music. There you go.
We'll just do a shout out to you every time and get to play the music. There we go.
Yeah. There you go. There's this nice music. We'll kind of fade out to that. Remember to follow us. Come say hi on social. We're on Instagram and Twitter at startupofyear.com. Sorry, Startup of Year. And then our domain is startupofyear.com. We've got some exciting news about our domain coming soon and in the near future. We'll share that soon. But if you're following along, you might also want to look at all the different ways you can find a podcast. If you're on Apple, we're there. If you're on Google, we're there. If you're just on the web, we're there too. So go look and find us there. Again, thanks again for joining us. I'm Frank Gruber. I'm in sunny downtown Las Vegas, where this is episode 7, and 7s are lucky. Thank you to Theron. Here's your walk-off music. music, as well as Lori Thiel, Rich Maloy, and the rest of the gang that helped us get this together. We'll be back with another episode soon.
Thanks for listening to the Startup of the Year podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll be back with another episode soon.